Hey guys, as per usual, I am out on my bike where I do my best thinking when I can basically just turn everything off in my head for the first couple of miles and just let my body do the work. And then all of a sudden my mind does wander and I get clarity on so much stuff when I'm out hiking, biking, anything outside, where I'm able to just turn my brain off and let my body do the work. I often get clarity. Sorry, I forgot to take my sunglasses off. I just had this really strange epiphany. And it's really, whoa, that lighting was odd. It's really something that's not necessarily gonna apply to everybody, but it applies to me. And it'll apply to anybody who considers themselves of strong faith. Sorry, I had to reposition myself. I'm on a very steep hill and I'm sliding down the bench. So as a healthy person, one of the things that the professionals in the mental health community say to do and recommend that we need to focus on and work on is regulating our emotions, regulating our emotional reactions to triggers, being aware, things like that. And there's a bee flying around my phone as I'm trying to record and I don't understand what he's doing. I don't know what's so attractive about my phone, but wow, weird lighting, hey. So anyway, getting back to the point, derailed. And this pertains in particular to narcissistic relationships, but also it's applicable to all sorts of toxic people. And one of the things that we're taught is to regulate our emotions and be aware of, emotional reactions to any sort of stimulus or trigger. And if we're supposed to do that and we're in a narcissistic relationship or a toxic person on a very regular basis, because remember, as I always say, like narcissistic type relationships as occurring on all levels in any type of dynamic with any in any situation, work, family, friendship, church, organization, club, board, whatever, it can happen anywhere. And there are so many narcissists in the world right now. Whether you're exposed to one or not is really, likely. It's just how often and how much exposure you have, and then whether you're an enabler or a target of a narcissistic individual in any given situation. So please, 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 I beg you to pay attention. If you're not the target and you are not seeing narcissism around you and you're like, what are you talking about, and you're really just kind of what? Chances are you are being an enabler, because it is so prevalent right now. And guys, I'm studying to become certified as a life coach. I'm working on it. Hopefully that will happen this year in 2023. There's so much I'm doing with my time, and I'm still working full time and running my art business and doing shows. And it's just, I'm trying to find time to stick on here, but I want to beg you to please pay attention. If you're not the victim or target or find yourself struggling with a narcissistic relationship in some form or fashion, chances are you are being groomed for or manipulated to be an enabler in another person's narcissistic relationship. So just please pay very close attention. So what I was getting at earlier, and my whole point of this video is just to say that those of us who want to focus on healing, we already know, and we've already discovered and been told and been working on the fact that we know and we recognize that we've got to regulate our emotions a lot better. One of the things that a narcissist loves to do and a toxic person loves to do is to bait us, to trick us, to get us to react in order for them to gain control of any given situation or of us, of our thought process, our decision making. And so what the professionals always recommend and coach us on is staying regulated and not having a reaction. And they use this term gray rock, this phrase called gray rocking, in an effort to describe, basically when you're being antagonized and the narcissist or toxic individual is trying to bait you into some sort of reaction. They're going to say things, they're going to do things specifically to get a reaction out of you, any sort of reaction that they get out of you, whether it be anger or tears, that allows them to feel as though they have the ability to control your emotions. And that's exactly what their goal is. They're trying to take advantage of and manipulate your vulnerability and your deep compassion for others and your deep sense of empathy for others and their hurts. And chances are it's because you have abuse and or trauma from your own past. That's what makes you aware and in tune with others. Hopefully you're on the recovery phase of that. But my point is, if we already know that we're supposed to regulate our emotions, if we already know that that's something that we can put into practice right away, even if we can't get out of whatever narcissistic relationship we're in, if we know that we're supposed to regulate our emotions and we're supposed to go gray rock, and that's the best way to combat or deal with a narcissistic individual or a toxic person, then our spirituality and faith-based coaching and teaching plays a huge role in our healing, doesn't it? Doesn't it make sense? Because most religions or faiths encourage their followers or believers to control their emotions, to regulate their emotions. In my experience, most religions talk a lot about being strong of spirit and being very careful that emotions can be a trap and can trick us and can fool us into believing that reality is what we feel. And that's not true. That's absolutely not true. And so there's a part of me that kind of was realizing, wow, if we are faith-based individuals and we have a high level of spirituality and faith, whatever religion we are, then basically being healthy at its very core means being strong of faith. So if we're in a situation where we're being tested emotionally, then we are already aware that we're being tested spiritually. So we already know that we're dealing with an individual who is basically testing our faith, abusing us, manipulating us, trying to take advantage of us, get control of our mind and heart, and basically trying to instigate a reaction in us, which is trying to taunt or awaken what is evil inside of us by utilizing, manipulating our emotions, trying to trick our emotions into thinking that things are horrible, or that we're doomed, or that we're trapped, or that it's all over from here, or that we're not well, or life is horrible. Any number of things. Basically, toxic individuals or unhealthy individuals or narcissists that we're dealing with are trying to trick us. They're what's unhealthy in them is trying to trick what's unhealthy in us, which is our emotions. So it makes sense and it stands to reason that the more we are able to master the regulation of our emotions, the healthier we'll be and the less susceptible to abuse, and the less likely we will find ourselves involved in any given situation with an individual like that. That is the epiphany I had today, and I'll give you an example now from my personal life recently. So my boss, so I've been on this new job for 6 months. It has been fantastic, the best place I've worked at in years. And my boss and I and my teammate and I, there's 3 of us in my accounting office, and it has been wonderful. Everybody has been great in the whole office. And my boss has been phenomenal. So she and I have had no issues in my first 6 months working there. None. I have no complaints whatsoever with her. But last week or 2 weeks ago, she snipped at me for something really hastily. She was very condemning in her talk, and she exaggerated when she snipped at me, and she kind of said it in an accusing tone, and it was kind of disrespectful. And I thought, okay, this is not the norm. I've not experienced it yet, even though it pissed me off, of course. I decided, because once I got through the, emotions of my reaction with it, I decided that I was going to let it go, because it was the first time. It was an isolated incident. I felt it had not happened before. And it had happened like on a Thursday towards the end of the week. So I let it go, had the weekend to kind of regroup, refocus, think realistically about it, that it's not the norm for her and everything like that. But then the next week, like on Monday, she snipped at me again, like pretty nasty. And I thought, all right, I need to talk to her. So I did talk to her, and the conversation went really well, and she recognized that she snipped at me. I told her, this is, I have a problem with that. It's not going to be okay with me if that happens. I was so proud of myself for having this conversation with her, and she apologized, and she was accountable, and the conversation was really brief, and it went really well. So then a couple days later, she snipped at me again. It wasn't targeted towards me. It wasn't in direct response to anything I did. She just snipped. She was short-tempered. So at first I was like, what the hell? We just talked. I told you this is a problem for me. And I was like, oh, I was fuming. Then I knew that she knew she had done something wrong, because she was then behaving excessively sweet to me. She was just overly friendly, overly sweet. And it was like, it wasn't her. I could feel her regret for snipping at me. And I knew that her snipping didn't have anything to do with me, but it still made me pissed because it wasn't okay. There was a marked excessive sweetness in her, which I took as like an apologetic. But it's like, for me, I would rather just have you acknowledge what you did wrong and apologize straight up than try to pretend as though nothing happened and be sweet like honey and pour the goo on. Just be real, just don't try to pretend. That's my perspective. Now, I know from her perspective, she probably recognized what she did, and she was just she felt bad and she was trying to turn around. But in the moment, I was so upset, because I was like, my gosh, we just talked about it. What the hell, I made it clear that this is not okay with me. We've had a great working relationship so far. I don't understand, like, how is our working relationship going to be? And I started to get kind of concerned. So I went home that day, and I carried this very negative frustration with me. And I rode my bike to work that day, and I kept trying to get over it and process it. And I couldn't get past it. I was so frustrated. And then, God bless my poor husband, he let me vent for a little while with him. And while I was venting, thank God, it came out as I was venting to him about this. Within like the first 2 minutes, I was like, she made me feel like my dad made me feel when I was a kid growing up in my house. Really, when I was growing up, my two older brothers victimized me so much. And my dad and mom abused me, like mentally and emotionally, so badly. And I felt so suffocated that I couldn't do anything about it. And one of the things that I think is so compelling is I'm just recently researching how the nervous system remembers things from your childhood, and how your nervous system doesn't forget. Sorry, plane flying above. Sorry, couldn't get it in the shot, but it is loud. It is like right above my head. Long story short, I guess, in summary, is that the nervous system, the professionals say the nervous system remembers your trauma. And when you are triggered, it recalls your trauma and how you felt when you were victimized as a young person or from the past. That's what they mean when they say the nervous system remembers. So every time someone behaves like this with me, snips at me unfairly and unjustly, I have a reaction that is completely out of control. Like, that is just irate. It's an unreasonable reaction to the trigger. And that's how you know it's a trigger, is because, okay, so she was ticked, but I know it wasn't directed at me. So why am I so upset, and why is it taking me so long to get over it? Is because she triggered something inside me when she snipped at me that made me feel like I did something wrong, even though rationally I knew I didn't. And that's why it felt so heavy, and that is why it was so hard to shake, because when I was a child, there was nothing I could do when I was treated unfairly. I had to just take it. There was no protection of me growing up in my house. I was victimized by both of my older brothers. I was taken advantage of by my mom emotionally and mentally and spiritually, because I was basically, she parentified me and she used me for her emotional support person and her counselor, especially and in particular with regards to her and my dad's relationship. And I was definitely my dad's punching bag, and he was controlling, and he was unattached emotionally from people in general. He just had no connection with his emotions. So growing up was very hard for me. And essentially that's why I have had such a hard time that day dealing with my bosses snipping at me and getting over it, getting over it. And why I have such a hard time getting over anyone who snips at me. It is from my childhood, from my past. But fortunately, I was able to vent for a little bit, talk to my husband who allows me to vent, and I was able to figure out for myself where the triggers were coming from, why I was feeling the way I was, and how to get past it, and how I was able to identify that it wasn't my boss snipping at me that was the problem, because that is definitely not the norm. It was my triggers from my past. I've already talked to her about anything directed towards me and being respectful, and that day it was not directed towards me. It was not in response to anything I had done. She just was crabby. In fact, my husband made the comment, and he went out on a limb and took a risk by saying this to me because he knows how I can be emotional. He said, it didn't sound to me like she was snipping at you. To me, it felt like that, but that comes from my childhood. But that was nice to hear him say that, because that helped me confirm internally that, yeah, it wasn't directed at me. Rationally thinking, she's a good person. Rationally thinking, she's very stressed and has a lot on her plate. Rationally thinking, she made it clear that she felt bad, even though it wasn't directed at me. In this particular case, that wasn't the norm. She wasn't trying to manipulate me. She wasn't trying to, take advantage of me or get control of me. I think she has some stuff going on, but she's a nice person. She's a good person. She has a good heart. And so therefore I decided in that moment to forgive her. And I think we as unhealthy people have a big risk and a big danger of allowing the good relationships to go sour if we let ourselves stay unhealthy for too long, or we don't focus on sorting through like our emotional reactions and things going on inside of us and internally as we are dealing with life, especially as we're walking the journey towards healthiness, because we're trying to figure everything out. We're trying to identify what's going on, why we're feeling the way we're feeling, and who's healthy and who's unhealthy. Our getting mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healthy hinges on paying attention to our emotions, paying attention to our emotional triggers and our emotional reactions, and making sure we're regulating them, making sense of them. So that's my 2 cents for today. As always, thank you so much for tuning in to Whole Wellness with Ann. Stay tuned for next time. Thanks, guys. Take care of you.